Welcome to the TechLink Health Podcast, an on-demand source for the top trending healthcare topics and insights. Delivered by key opinion and emerging leaders and as featured on the TechLink Health app. The healthcare industry is rapidly evolving, so our goal is to connect listeners to the most relevant insights, ranging from digital health to financial well-being to interesting side gigs. For more details, visit www.techlink.health.
Well, hey everyone, welcome back to the TechLink Health Podcast. I'm Dr. Sarah Saman, and my guest today is Dennis Kogan with Care Syntax. The proliferation of emerging technologies within healthcare stands to solve many problems while increasing efficiencies alongside accelerating safer and smarter solutions. But the path to the future is still early in the development cycle, and there are several challenges as well as opportunities on the horizon. For example, in the past, we've talked about the topics of data integrity and data biases to build sustainable and inclusive models, alongside the need to build out our future of society models to enhance regulation and moderate the societal transformation process. And at the same time, we're rethinking the future of healthcare and keeping an open mind to all the possibilities. So in today's episode, we're going to dig deeper into the latest developments in data-driven surgical procedures and how technologies such as AI are shaping the future. This episode's guest is Dennis Kogan, health tech entrepreneur, investor, and founder, CEO of Care Syntax, a company pioneering a new era of data-driven surgery by using AI-powered software, devices, and clinical services to make surgical procedures safer, smarter, and more efficient. Care Syntax's clients are health systems, multinational insurers, and industry partners. Care Syntax solutions are present in over 3,000 operating rooms around the world and support surgical teams in more than 3 million procedures per year. So Dennis is a global pioneer in the healthcare AI space, building teams and products to address problems in various key markets and outside typical clusters of innovation, like San Francisco or Boston. For example, Berlin, Istanbul, Tokyo, and Sydney. His approach is rooted in his upbringing amongst a physician-heavy family, alongside deep technical and business expertise with degrees from Carnegie Mellon and Harvard Business School. So it goes without saying that Dennis has deep expertise in data-driven approaches to healthcare, alongside pioneering expertise in health AI that provides a unique perspective on human health and the journey to view health as a universal global priority. We look forward to getting his perspectives. So without further delay, we're excited to welcome Dennis to the podcast. Dennis, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you for introducing me so nicely.
So to start and to give our listeners some background, can you take a moment to introduce yourself in a bit more detail and tell us about your journey into the data-driven and AI-centric health space?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you mentioned, I'm sort of a third culture kid. I spent a lot of time in the US. I spent a lot of time in Europe, and I'm a son and grandson of physicians, surgeons who came out of the former Soviet Union. So I feel like I've both in my childhood, but also in my adulthood, experienced quite a lot of different things geographically and also in terms of different health systems, from things that weren't working at all in 1989, collapsing Soviet Union, to Europe, to US with its own opportunities and problems. So, I was growing up thinking that I might not be doing anything in healthcare because of all those adversities I've seen growing up. And it's really through my journey in college that I started getting back to thinking more about healthcare. Carnegie Mellon is a pretty well-known computer science and robotics and engineering school. And at the time when I was there, I was already dabbling with a lot of technologies in other mission critical industries, defense and security, but also in sports. CMU has a big sports analytics conference. I saw a lot of interesting use cases for how data, situational awareness, decision support make a meaningful difference for operators in their respective fields to drive their performance and improve their respective outcomes, from athletes to Navy SEALs. And so I remember at the time already talking to my dad and asking, hey, when you were doing surgery, did you get anything like that? I said, not at all. I was still doing everything in my head, or like I still had to make that snap call here and there. And I remember thinking, well, that's interesting. We're doing a lot for NBA athletes or even college athletes. And then our surgeons are still quarterbacks without the tech. They're still trying to cope with the complexity and the risk themselves. And that was the initial shaping portions where I was like, okay, like you don't have to necessarily invent new deep tech here. You really have to be thinking about adapting things to healthcare and to surgery, which has been a little bit, I would say, isolated from a lot of innovation, given the specificity of what that therapy is. Because like you think about what we've experienced from healthcare innovation perspective in primary care, chronic diseases, surgery is so tucked away in infrastructure, in sterile environments with seconds mattering, with regulatory burden that requires high level of precision because of the risk. It just obviously it dampens the speed of innovation. And there were certain challenges in terms of the infrastructure and the ability to even deploy these kinds of tools. And so, after those days, as I was going through my early career in consulting, where I did a lot of healthcare and then business school, I was thinking more about it. And then having met my co-founder who had his own journey in healthcare and in the industry, we started putting some of these ideas together. And in the end, not in the US, but in Germany, we're both German nationals. We started Care Syntax in 2014 as a culmination of some of these thoughts that we both had in parallel for about 7-8 years. And so there's a lot of understanding through our family and who are physician driven about the lack of support that tech provides. And then from my perspective, just because I was a tech person, I had a lot of understanding of what's possible. And so a lot of innovation in healthcare is really kind of adaptation, right? Because consumers outside healthcare, for example, experience generative AI way before clinicians. So I think you don't have to invent things. Sometimes you have to think about the applications, and that's what we did. Obviously, you have to adapt a lot of things, but it's in that process of adaptation is the secret sauce. But I think the amount of tech we have in the world, if more people would be thinking about existing technologies and how they can work in healthcare, I think we could accelerate tremendously, with the acceptance of obviously clinical innovation around biotechnology, where it really is tailored to healthcare directly. So that's kind of a long answer, but hopefully gives you a sense of how we got there. And obviously we've been in it for over a decade now.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing those insights and your journey. And it is interesting how healthcare benefits from tech innovations. And we've seen that really over the last several decades. But there is that challenge of the infrastructure and the high stakes when things go wrong. And so I think that we sometimes think about these as two separate entities. But as you say, somebody like you with that insight into how people work in the healthcare sphere can merge those two modalities and help create a bridge. So the Care Syntax solutions have achieved some notable milestones, positioning it for future growth at scale, which we'll talk about here shortly. But before we get into some of those notable milestones and future vision of the technology, can you give us an overview of how your technology works and a sense of that procedural journey?
Yes, of course. And I'll start that description via a statement that we are probably a little different from a lot of health tech companies in a sense that we, from the get-go, started as a platform company that actually integrates multiple technologies and fuses them and converges these technologies to achieve like a more complex outcome improvement objective. And so there's multiple applications and multiple products that we have at this stage. But that being said, I think the secret sauce and the real differentiating backbone here is our ability to go into the surgical workflows and integrate the right sources of data to create a data backbone, an insights backbone that you can then in different ways shape to improve, automate, or inform different workflows in the entire perioperative journey. So what I mean is 10 years ago, our first challenge was extracting information and data from the operating room itself, which was for a long time, quote unquote, dark to any intelligence besides the people working on it. There was no way to get any information out of the OR unless a nurse would input that into a terminal. There was no way to connect the device properly to a content management platform that could then look at, a laparoscopic video even of what happened from a technical perspective. So the integration of intraoperative sources was really the initial forays. And then once you start thinking about surgery as a pre, intra, and post-operative process, a perioperative process, and the number of this clinical and operational decisions in different stages that clinicians have to make to shepherd the patient through that episode, you start adding pre and post-operative integration challenges to create this complete record that combines various types of data from electronic medical record to videos from the OR to patient-reported outcomes. Once you glue that together into that high-fidelity surgical record, the concepts of building workflows from data become a multi-point opportunity. And we've, from that competency, build multiple workflows through applications that target key levers of improving outcomes in surgery. And these outcomes are not only clinical, they're also operational. We target as much the efficiency of throughput, increasing access for patient, increasing stability of how that patient flows through the journey, pre-operative, intraoperatively, and post-operatively, but also clinically. So you have a lot of variability and risk and decision-making that can go right or wrong depending on the preparedness of the physician in terms of understanding who that patient is, in terms of getting certain awareness about the risk that specific patient has. And we are also able to insert these safety enhancing decision support moments into that episode. So as a result, we are pulling on all the key levers to both make the episode safer by decreasing variability or the risk of adverse outcomes. And we're making it efficient because ORs are scarce and physicians and surgeons especially is not a huge population of caregivers. And so we don't want situations like we see in the UK after the pandemic where somebody wants to wait for 2 years for a surgery. So we target the throughput use cases as well. And finally, of course, because we operate in an ecosystem of insured healthcare and also ecosystem that involves medical technology vendors, we work not only with providers, but as you mentioned initially, we tailor specific use cases to workflows that are tandems between providers and either their payer partners or their medical device partners, right? So you have various applications that enable a medical device vendor to serve the surgeon better through our technology as well. And we have certain applications where an insurance partner may be able to understand and steer certain patients or create a high value distinction for the physician based on the information from our system as well. But all of it, I know it sounds abstract, all of it comes from that initial competency of integrating data. And then once you have that with modern tech, again, software development and now AI, you can build these applications in a way that deliver value to a specific use cases much more cheaply and efficiently.
Great. I think those are really important insights that this tech is not just about gathering information, but about improving access to care, efficiency, safety, and as you say, clinical outcomes can be impacted in a very meaningful way. So let's dig deeper into the data-driven aspects of Care Syntax's solutions. And on one hand, we're early in the journey to realizing the efficiency gains in AI technologies, but on the other hand, early adopters are able to point to quantifiable outcomes, as you've discussed. So, along those lines, what are some of the key data points that point to the solution being safer, smarter, and more efficient?
Yeah, no, it's very important. Obviously, no innovation can be adopted at scale without tangible, quantifiable impacts. And just in the same spirit of me talking about multiple use cases, there are, of course, multiple proof points for each type of workflow. So, there could be a separate conversation almost going into the depth of how specific KPIs are shaped for various applications, but taking the same kind of equation of what matters in surgery, which is throughput and efficiency around utilization of capacity, as well as clinical parameters, and then ultimately the total cost of that case and really as a financial representation of a good outcome. We have specific metrics and results that make it easier for us to prove that it's a working solution. For example, if you go back to what mattered immediately after the pandemic and even during the pandemic, effective utilization of your capacity and being able to really schedule and staff surgeries in these operating rooms, we have shown very specific and published on it as well. You can probably find on the internet some of the success stories of our customers where we've significantly increased utilization of assets and capacity, close to 40% utilization increases in many cases by supporting management of capacity through our solutions and data science. So that's an operational side, case volumes and block utilization with double-digit percentage increases. If you talk about clinical aspects, right, because we go deep together with physicians in those real-time environments inside the OR, you have a lot of peer-reviewed research that was conducted in conjunction with using our technology, where numerous surgeons globally, by the way, as you mentioned, in the US and in France and in the Netherlands, have shown that using the technology improves the technical skill and the real clinical execution of certain complex techniques and various procedures because of the automation, the support in the OR, but also because of the post-procedural data that's available on and the debriefs that are now much more easy to conduct, right? So if you think about a surgeon who is trying to improve her skills without integration of data from the OR, it's really difficult to recall exactly how and what you did, right? And as a physician yourself, you can imagine that without documentation, which was not really available in that operational depth, it's almost impossible to reconstruct and try to figure out what could have gone wrong, what was a near miss. All that information is not available. So lots of surgeons have proven that both for resident, but also for experienced surgeon, it's now possible to really flesh out and decrease variability in technique. And it's been published on the correlation between that and clinical outcomes is very strong. And so you have a lot of clinical value and it's very procedure specific. You have something in orthopedics that may be different in soft tissue surgery, but there's this universal effect of taking data and learning from it clinically. And then if you take the final view, which is the financial view, especially in the environment where cost burden is on patients, the ability to do so safely without revisions, repetitions that are paid for again and again, we've definitely shown the ability to use the information to understand the true value drivers and actually help providers change certain things so that their total cost of care decreases and their total margin per case goes up, which is important because unfortunately unprofitable procedural care is not sustainable and it usually leads to a lack of access for patients. So everybody has to conduct this profitably. And so we've been able to show this in different procedure basis, for example, again, in the soft tissue space and very common hernia-based procedures, ventral hernias, where we've been able to show significant multi-$1,000 per case impact on the real margins. And I know it sounds abstract, maybe a little bit tangential to the conversation about safety, but at the end of the day, I think efficiency, safety, and sustainable financial situations have to really coexist for this to be something that scale for thousands of patients. So we pay a lot of attention to it as well. I could keep talking about it, but as you can see, you have this profitability equation, volume, costs, revenue. We can impact this, and all of that in the end, from a value-based care perspective, accrues to the patients in having consistently better outcomes.
Fascinating. And I think that there is this concern amongst physicians that maybe aren't familiar with the use of AI, that AI is going to take over or do something to change the way that they do their jobs in a negative way. But instead, we're looking at, as you discussed, improving technical skills, which enhances the surgeon's outcomes, the surgeon's personal satisfaction, patient outcomes, reduces cost and increases throughput. So we have more access for more patients to get the care they need. So sticking to the theme of efficiency gains, what are some of the best practices that you can share with other startups or other corporate entities that are looking to develop these kinds of solutions in the data-driven AI space? And what have you learned along your journey, and how might others approach a similar path?
There are multiple business lessons as much as kind of structural technology creation lessons. I always talk about value and real impact on end users first and foremost, and technology second. I think as a technologist with technical background, it's easy to fall in love with your own innovation that's based on technical parameters, but the complexity of healthcare, both in terms of clinical specificity and also the multi-stakeholder, to use a fancy word, heterogeneity. You've got, even within a hospital, you've got physicians, nurses, operational people, financial people, innovation people, then you've got insurance people on top, then you've got medical device vendors, there's infrastructure, buildings, right? You've got a lot of different stakeholders. So I think the biggest lesson here is to really map carefully to real value and real pain points. It's not a healthcare only objective, right? You always want to build something that represents practical value, but in healthcare, it's specifically confusing sometimes, right? Because it's just not as simple as talking to a consumer and knowing what to build for them. They purchase that, right? There's just a web of influence factors here, and taking that combined with the fact that it's a mission critical, regulatorily enforced industry, it's not exactly a place for lean A/B testing like you could do in e-commerce. Any decision you make, you may not know whether it was the right one or wrong one until 2 years from now. And so I think it does require a kind of a balance of thinking really hard about how is it going to deliver value, at the same time still taking risk to be able to say, you know what, I don't know everything. So we have to start moving and taking those risks and carefully adjusting as we go. So I think it's maybe the generality for entrepreneurs and for those who create companies, but I think tailored to healthcare, I think it just has this specific set of rules related to speed and ability to think through a more of a multifaceted landscape. So my advice is to think hard about that. And then of course you have to have talent with you who represents the right levers. It's impossible to do things in healthcare without real clinical knowledge. And I'm not a clinician myself. I'm a son of a physician, but it's not like I could step into a surgeon's shoes myself. We have surgeons, my colleagues who are surgeons. We have chief nursing officer, right? You have to be able to develop these things from a caregiver perspective. Otherwise, you'll never get adopted, right? Just because it's just too specialized and it's too important. But by the same token, though, you have to have technical people who understand the IT infrastructure and the artificial intelligence. So you do have, in the end, maybe the final point here, a pretty important and big set of investments to really build excellent systems. And that requires, from my perspective, excellence in also financing this. I always say that healthcare entrepreneurship and building new technologies for innovation requires as much focus on proving value to those who will use it, to those who will sponsor the development of this, and the investment community, and the ability to prove all that in your business plan for those with very patient attitudes. So ability to build your own balance sheet as a company who tries to innovate, I think, especially important in healthcare. As a result, this clinical technology, it's almost mimicking the operational, clinical, and financial outcomes we seek to make. You have to match them with operational, clinical, and financial inputs of your own.
Really important points. And the stakes are higher when we're talking about AI in healthcare. We're talking about not just money, but patients' lives and their outcomes. So having that collaboration between the different parts of the team is especially important. So everyone's talking about the potential use cases for AI in healthcare, but there's a growing need to share success stories to highlight the various capabilities of the technology and therefore get more buy-in to the idea of using these technologies. So in the case of Care Syntax, tell us more about some of your clients and how they're using the technology.
Yeah, no, and I think we talked about the broader use case. So I presume the question is more like towards a more advanced AI features and automation that takes it to the next level. And again, it all follows this map of what type of outcome we're targeting. On the clinical side, the concept of precision medicine that we've, really focused on in oncology, right? And another important healthcare disciplines has a lot to give in surgery, right? So any given patient represents, and a surgeon team that will be treating that patient represents an opportunity to tailor the approach and opportunity to take into account the individual profile of the patient to achieve the best outcome, which means predictors of various kinds that can anticipate issues is a massive opportunity to decrease risk. So take one of the most common problems after surgery, infection. Surgical site infections, probably number one problem that's generalizable across most procedures. There are ways that AI and our clients are doing that now with our predictors to reduce that risk of surgical site infection becoming a problem, but by being aware of the likelihood of it happening on the way out of the OR. And so we have clients who are starting to introduce that to change the protocol of treatment and prevent that from becoming a problem for the patient after they get discharged. And obviously, it's not a generic thing because it depends on who that patient is and what the comorbidities are and what happened in the OR and how much tissue damage was there or not at all. Was there bleeding? Was there too much bleeding? So you take all these factors, right? And I think just as a human who if that human would really have the time and the data could put it together, of course, a machine can predict that too. And it's been done in literature before in more manual ways. So being able to integrate that as an AI tool, I think is a really good example. And of course, there are many others that all piggyback on exactly that concept, taking all these disparate data streams near real time during that episode, and then creating a correlation to understand what's likely to happen, and then making the physicians or the operational leaders aware. Exactly the same logic goes into operational use cases. Length of stay. Is this patient likely to need more capacity being utilized because of that risk? Is there a likely chance that this case will run over? It's all based on these same metrics. And if you harness them, you can really improve the awareness and projection of how you behave, and you just decrease that overall uncontrolled variability that creates all these bad outcomes.
Those are really important points, and especially the idea of predictors. We're very good at having these preoperative risk assessments, but then when you take into account what happened in the OR and very specific things that can be quantified and brought into a database that allows the patient to get enhanced care that might be beyond what would have been expected, I can see that the benefit to patient outcomes could be really substantial. So it's often the case that many technologies end up having unintended uses after a solution's been modified and used in various ways. Are there any use cases outside of the current use in surgical procedures that have surfaced in your work or maybe in the development roadmap?
I'm very confident that the approach overall is very transportable to a lot of procedural type therapies. Not that we've gone there. Personal passion I have for getting closer to tough clinical challenges. I could foresee similar approaches in terms of integration of multiple data sources and building multiple workflows for complex handovers working really well in like gene and cell therapy world, where as this field grows, you'll have very similar problems to surgery, trying to match patients and keep them close to the academic centers where the biological manufacturing needs to happen, and then monitoring them for a month about how things take. So you will have these advanced interventional areas that touch on genes and cells that will, I think, essentially replicate a lot of the methodology. Not that we have done it. I'm just projecting that I think the similarity here. If you're talking about within our field, we focus very heavily on surgery and procedural care. And so if you consider anesthesia use cases or things like that a little bit different, then yes, we have encountered a lot of interest in the same concept from those who accompany those cases, right? Everything I've mentioned in terms of risk scoring, in terms of reporting and debriefing and understanding, and not just a surgeon could use, other physicians who are participating could as well. And in some cases, with anesthesiologists, or if it's an oncology case, you have pathology implications there, right? And they have a lot of interesting adjacent use cases that all fall into this similar workflows. And then, of course, on top of that, right, and this is maybe a recent discovery, again, if you map on the provider caregiver universe, the insurance companies and the medical device companies who have their own related objectives, you compound the value, right? So like very recently, we've discovered that the data that we have, of course, is very indicative of value. And that as medical device companies who are increasingly starting to face similar requirements and needs to differentiate their products and quantify the impact of their products, as, for example, the pharmaceutical and life sciences community has gone through, different ways the FDA is now approving things, different way physicians require proof points for specific medical technology like robotic systems. They're also requiring some of that data to prove that the indications that they be interested in going into are best served for their technologies, and prove beyond clinical trials that in that specific environment for those specific patients, this technology is working. So we're learning that need to extrapolate value out of data in surgical procedural care. It scales all the way to FDA indication expansion approvals, and conversely to changes in reimbursement. So you're probably familiar with concepts of narrow, high value networks and centers of excellence, where even employers like Walmart are looking at different surgical institutions and are trying to understand which surgeon can not only do a fantastic job on their employee, but also bring that employee back to productive work-life balance sooner, right? And that requires data again. And if you get that, you as an employer or a patient may be willing to even pay more or go to that patient because that's a high value provider. So you can see that these cases, they reach all the way into decisions around how to structure your insurance plans. The power of data is remarkable. And then if you remember that surgery is a vast area of therapy, right? Just going back to the numbers, little known fact, it wasn't known to myself at least, that it's over $1 trillion of annual spend. Procedural spend, more than $1 trillion. It's a double-digit percentage of healthcare expenditures in total. So information about how to run surgery safer, smarter, efficiently, without complications has just tremendous impact that I personally and we as a company believe is really a top 5 impact objective in healthcare overall in terms of the size of the opportunity.
That's a huge number. And really, we think about individual patients, individual situations. But when you look at the giant picture, it's an enormous expense. And anything that we can do to make that more efficient, but also more effective, safer, better is to everyone's advantage. So, what advice do you have for clinicians that are embarking on the journey of leveraging data driven technologies such as AI in practice? And along those lines, is there a need to promote discoverability of all of these new technologies?
It's a great question. And of course, I'm not a clinician myself, and I wish I'd have our chief medical officer with me to speak more directly as a physician, but especially in surgery, right? Again, going back to the fact that even if you're a physician, you're still working with a lot of other people to make things happen. I think being engaging in interdisciplinary initiatives within your provider organization is crucial, right? We haven't seen surgeons successfully bring innovation that helps them without support and involvement of nursing staff, operational staff. At the end of the day, it is a team. And so clinicians need to collaborate also on aspects of bringing these types of technology and that infrastructure with those who support them. And so I definitely feel like collaboration and engaging in the initiatives internally leads to quicker arrival of those said technologies, because everybody needs to understand the value of it, even though surgeons and clinicians very often see it first. And it's not a surprise, surgeons really love the stuff that we're talking about it, but there's cost, there's impact and disruption, there's priorities and the number of things that may be in the queue. So I think that's a very important organizational aspect. And beyond that, I think it's about kind of data orientation in general. I do think that out of the box AI that just plugs in is still pretty young. I think the opportunity that's more immediate still for a lot of clinicians is to really grasp the power of data and really engage and spend more time in wanting data and working towards getting that data and working with those who can help bring the right quality of data into their practice to be able to leverage the insights that can come out of it. So some degree of data science and clinical research that typically goes into development of new medical technologies need to be applied internally to study your own process, and be a scholar of improving your own proverbial goal swings and really focusing on the incremental gains and understanding what data can help one get there. Being a little bit of a data geek, I think helps bring the world of AI closer, because I think there's more things immediately available from analytics around the surgical case. And then discoverability, for sure. It's still an early adopter marketplace, right? You guys as organizers of your podcasts are probably at the forefront of helping to decrease the costs of understanding what's out there. But it's a very, very new marketplace with a lot of technologies that are pretty abstract. And what I described as our platform is very difficult to visualize without a demonstration. And so being able to find the places where you can really feel and see these technologies and engage with people who are building those, which can happen through organizations such as yours, to innovation consulting firms, to conferences. I could imagine as an operating surgeon being there from 6 a.m, doing cases in sterile fields to the evening. Where does that come from? So my guess is that there needs to be an increased digital pathway to discovering all these things Fortunately, lots of these things over the last 5 years have been retrained to be presented and demonstrated virtually. And so I think an investment in digital discovery in the evenings post-procedurally for physicians, I think is the only way to get there. But there needs to be a set of organizations who focus on that. And I really appreciate the approach that you guys have. Bringing spotlight on different technologies in a casual way, I think is probably something that surgeons and physicians could do without massive travel or nighttime browsing sessions. So I think, there isn't probably a magic bullet here, but, the more organizations that promote structured spotlights and overviews, the quicker physicians can get mainstream understanding for how these things fit into care.
I think that's a really important point, the practicality of making this work. And physicians are, in many cases, overloaded with tasks and jobs and getting things done. And they need proof. Most physicians require data to gain acceptance of anything new. So anything that would make that process more efficient for a physician, give them that certainty that this is actually going to make their job better, their life more manageable, I think is something that will allow them to provide better care for their patients. I think those are all things that will ultimately give us more buy-in for physicians as a whole. So on the podcast recently, the theme of health equity has surfaced in many of our conversations. Tell us more about the global implications of the Care Syntax solutions and others like it, and how these solutions will have to create a mindset of health as a universal global priority and at the same time contribute to more equitable outcomes.
Yeah, it's a very big topic in general. Just like there's a lot of variability for patients in terms of the outcomes, I think there's also a lot of variability in access, especially through the pandemic, the shutdown of elective procedural care and just overwhelmed hospitals, not just in emerging markets, but even here stateside. All of that was a pretty significant public health emergency that I would say is still not completely resolved. And of course, the ability to prioritize and the ability to get from a patient's perspective into the right provider organization and get that spot. I think these are massive determinants of the outcomes. So I think the ability to decrease the cost of access and ability to improve the utilization of capacity and take out all these inefficiency and disruptions that make it harder to serve patients, I think there's a pretty significant global implication, right? So if we could do this globally right now, overnight, we could unlock incredible amount of capacity that for a lot of non-elective treatment, again, we're talking about cancers, we're talking about heart procedures, we're talking about a lot of very acute interventions, we could save hundreds of thousands of people. So there's a real incentive and there's a real impact that exists here from a perspective of regulators, governments, those who set incentives. And we started doing a little bit. We're in the World Economic Forum. We just recently joined the Milken Institute here. We really talk a lot about making sure that folks understand that surgery is not just elective surgery. It's not about just, improving your golf swing. It's about critical diseases. It's about access, not just in big cities, not just in coastal areas, in rural areas where access is even harder, and that not everything works out of the box as well as many of us believe. I think we have an average complication rate of near 15% in surgery and a mortality rate that still approaches 1%. I think that is very high for something that's considered safe. So I would say there's a safer steady state. And as I said, I use the dollar denomination in terms of trillion, but if you think about medical near misses or misses, if you think about all these complications that turn to pain in a good scenario to real damage or revisions or even worse, there's a huge human impact on patient. There's huge impact on their families who have to deal with this. And we have employees. A lot of our employees came to us having experienced surgery in a way that wasn't perfect, and their families and some investors. So there's a real social aspect here. Surgery is acute, it's risky, and not done because you are volunteering into it for the most part. I think that's a misrepresentation. And given the acuity of it, I think all of us who care about improving human health I think should be focusing more on it. So I keep promoting it, and the mindset is there, maybe not touching surgery directly, but I guess it's our job. And thank you for asking the question, to keep raising awareness. And I think all of us in the ecosystem, including companies we compete with, we're all doing our part, I believe, and we're very passionate about it.
Excellent. And of course, that's the overriding purpose, is to take care of patients. And so, from the standpoint of a physician, anything that would allow a physician to do their job more effectively, safer, with better outcomes for the patients that they care for is something that likely over time is going to have buy in. Once we have more accessibility with these kinds of technologies, when thinking about the future of data driven technologies, and what direction are we heading, and what will we see in, say, 2040 looking ahead? And along those lines, and then narrowing the scope a bit, what do you see in store for the future of care syntax?
Yeah, great question. I sometimes get caught off guard about predicting speed of development, considering the number of black swan events we've experienced over the last years. But I think 2040 is sufficiently far out to be able to say that I think healthcare will be safer, it will be more effective. And I think the biggest role that data can play is actually the same role that it plays in our regular life. It's data and insights from data and automation through AI helps us to converge multiple streams of useful knowledge and compound it into an even more valuable insight. And when a patient arrives to have a procedure or even to see their primary care physician, I think in 2040, the entire background of that patient with all the comorbidities and all the potential risk factors and scenarios of how they combine in between each other will be laid out in like way more effective prognostic scorecard, if you will. And I think it'll make it so much easier, combined with the real clinical innovation that's happening on the biotechnology side, to treat patients, especially with kind of polychronic diseases or multiple things going on at the same time. The power of data and AI to sort of bake complexity of multiple, like multivariate problems into something that's more digestible for an A or B decision is incredible. And all of us are very complex biological beings. We have a lot of issues that may change the result, and there is a way to quantify that. So the more the technology gets adopted, the more data is available, the more learning from that data that is going to occur over the next 15 plus years. And ultimately, it'll accrue back into providing these recommendation and maybe ultimately prescriptive assistance that will make it easier to handle complex situations in a simple way. And I think it's very important because in surgery, for example, we deal with it a lot. With aging population, the acuity is increasing, and being able to handle these things safely in more fragile population is going to get easier. And for us, it means employing exactly these things. We are continuously learning ourselves, and our algorithms are being trained, and our technology is improving to gradually move towards a more active role in supporting the clinical decisions, right? Carefully, in a way that is well tested, that is regulatorily considered, that is safe, but ultimately proactive risk management in surgery through AI, through automated support sequences, just like it happened with commercial aviation, where the number of minutes of a flight that is not handled by automated systems has decreased dramatically. And that flight just became safer. Some sort of a shift should happen in surgery for us, and some shift overall like that is going to happen broadly in healthcare. And whether it's 2040 or 2050, we'll see. But I think we have in the technology and scientific community all the right ingredients to work towards that objective.
Wonderful. Yes, the idea of supporting the care that physicians are providing is something that I think is going to enhance the acceptance of this type of technology. So there's so much going on in healthcare innovation and health tech that it's difficult to hone in on all of the developments. And that also provokes a thought of, what are we missing? So from your perspective, is there something we're not talking enough about that we probably should be?
Yeah, great question. I keep going back to some of the trade-offs that healthcare has. It's mission critical, so that should be making things fast, but at the same time, we're all very careful. It's regulated, which is good, but it slows you down. You've got clinician you've got for profit, not for profit, you've got reimbursement challenges. At the end of the day, the complexity is very high. And so I often find, and your question about what surgeons or physicians should do to get more out of it is a very good one. I think the incentives and simplification of creating kind of movement in the face of complexity, which is actually not a technological problem. I think a lot of the technology is already there, and it's really about discovering it, as you mentioned, but also creating the incentives to prioritize it that needs to be spoken for. And I think there are elements of this in the history of US healthcare. The government has a lot to do with it. I do believe an active role of government in jogging innovation in healthcare, unless you completely deregulate it, which is not what any of us would recommend. It needs to be regulated because it has to do with lives of people. But by the same token, the government should allow the community to push towards innovation and push towards taking some informed risks about changing ways treatments are conducted, right? It's, again, handled much better, in my opinion, in the biotechnology world. I think there's a lot of focus there versus servicing. And so I think more of that same conversation needs to happen outside the acute biotech space and in procedural space. And the involvement and support of governments, insurance companies is, I think, a big determinant. So not that it's not talked enough about, but it's often talked about in ways that are not very actionable. And so I would wish for some more straightforward incentive plans that are not overcomplicating things and providing maybe financial incentive, maybe incentives around leadership in specific fields for people to feel like they need to innovate towards showing that result to others. I feel like there's not enough of that. And again, there are instances of governments having done that well. And we spend quite a bit of time in DC these days as well, as I said, and being part of Milken and Davos ecosystem, the awareness around the fact that lots of things are already available now, if the right incentives are created, can dramatically cut the amount of time to achieve these things. It is not a technology problem alone.
Thank you for sharing those insights. And in closing, any final recommendations for those who are interested in staying connected to your work with Care Syntax and other data-driven technologies? Any key points that we didn't cover that you'd like listeners to know? And any topical recommendations such as books or other content that you believe will help our listeners?
Yeah, I think staying connected with our work, again, is best through digital means. I think we're trying to be as prolific as we can, posting on LinkedIn and on social networks. We've got various days with different themes. I think we have Customer Wednesdays where we post some of these outcomes that we talked about, and always try to make sure that everything we do is quickly promoted with broader community to see if there are opportunities that can come out of it. So that's probably the easy part. I think in terms of coverage of what I'd like our listeners to know, I think we spoke a lot about various things. I know it's hard for physicians over the last years to prioritize things that are not their immediate responsibility of caring for patients. So for sure, tapping into more digital means of discovery and participating in conversations online, including LinkedIn, around how technology can help. Not as many physicians as I would expect do that. So whenever they do, we also tend to engage. So I think actually there are time and cost effective way for folks to participate in the ecosystem, no matter where you are. And I think it's actually very noticeable for us when a physician stands up and asks something like this or is participating in a discussion. I think it just makes for a more active process of creating a mainstream understanding for how these things fit into care. And then content-wise, I'm engulfed in day-to-day life managing and running the business that I probably am the wrong person to talk about what books or what big resources there are. But of course, again, the power of social networks these days, even for healthcare content, carefully, of course, know how important it is to distinguish between verifiable sources or not. There's so much out there already daily in a feed that if you were to follow me or some of the colleagues, that you would immediately be scaling into 20 thought leaders that we follow and articles that we read and post, that I think it's the easiest way to quickly plug in into a very rich source of information about how AI helps in healthcare. I've been very impressed by the development of LinkedIn, for example, as a forum for discovery. of really important content. And for me, that's a real big shortcut to discovering people who have good advice, both technologically or in terms of clinical innovation. It comes natural to us, but I know that some folks are still not so active on the physician community in some of these networks.
Excellent. So it sounds like reaching out and following you on LinkedIn would be a great way for people to get to know more about your work. Our guest today has been Dennis Kogan with Care Syntax. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your insight and experience with our listeners.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks for listening to this episode. TechLink Health is a healthcare advisory platform for consumers and organizations to stay informed with the latest insights while connecting with healthcare experts for telehealth, e-consults, and consulting services. For more details, visit www.techlink.health.